Kate Kelly is here, and we're lucky to have her. We're going to be talking about shares of Saudi Arabia's state-owned oil company, expected to begin trading on that country's stock exchange this week. But it hasn't been the smoothest ride for Saudi Aramco's IPO. Kate's here to talk about the company's failed quest for a $2 trillion valuation. And I guess, Kate, if you're really looking at this, you would judge this as a success that it finally got out the gate after all the troubles they had along the way, or is this to be determined at this point because it fell so short of a $2 trillion valuation and because it's not listed on an international stock exchange?
Right. I mean, I think to be fair to them, it's TBD. It's possible they'll get to that $2 trillion mark over time. I mean, this is a stock that should be trading for many years to come. The thing is, though, that Mohammed Bin Salman, the crown prince, who was the person that unveiled the plans to take this deal public in 2016 as part of his vision for modernizing and diversifying the country, really had his heart set on a true $2 trillion valuation, or even $3. And if you look at that document, he said 2 to 3. So to come in at 1.7, and then after this fairly rocky road that I write about in the story, where the international banks they hired tried as much as they could to sort of make that work and show scenarios.
Where do you think you got the number from, the original number? I assume some of these same bankers must have told them that originally.
I don't know. I mean, this came up in many conversations, and there was some impression that he just sort of came up with it on his own.
It's like 420 from Elon Musk.
Right.
And the other thing that you would hear from sort of experienced bankers, and especially people that know the E&P sector, is it's not hard to value an oil production company. I mean, you have many comps out in the public sphere. So the fact that there was so much kind of back and forth over what this should be worth is a little hard to understand.
I mean, this is such a different company, though.
Yeah.
Because of the Saudi government's ownership interest, because
Sure.
it caps the upside for what can happen in some of these scenarios. Because it's now on the Saudi Arabian stock exchange, that means a lot of international investors, U.S. investors, can't play into this. Do you think there would have been more demand if U.S. investors could, or do you think it would have showed potential shortfalls of this business model and this company?
So I think it certainly would have been a more widely distributed book. My understanding is that investors were very interested. One thing I talk about in the piece is that they went out and did what they call pilot fishing in the UK, which I guess is sort of an early unofficial roadshow where you have certain comps but not all the full details. You bring management on the road. They met with 80 companies. Mm-hmm. They met with BlackRock, Capital Group. They met with Janus Henderson and many others. And people wanted to buy it, but they just
That was before we had all the issues with Khashoggi, right?
No, so this was, you're right that this has been an ongoing process for years, but this phase that I was talking about was relatively recently. It was late September, early October, so about a year after Khashoggi. But people wanted to buy it at a much lower price point. I mean, they were talking about, as hedge funds, of course, in New York and other places, we're talking about like $1.1 trillion implied valuation, or going on up to 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, but not 2.
Well, I mean, is that almost a victory lap of sorts if you can say, look, we got 1.7, and that was the high end of the range that JP Morgan came in and said you can make it, we can see it anywhere from 1.1 to 1.7. At least it's coming out at the high end of their kind of updated guidance.
That's definitely how they're looking at it. And I think one thing they have talked about, and this is true, is the company is a point of national pride in Saudi. You've been there, I've been there. I mean, it's apparently a very sophisticated operation, well run, well respected on the national stage. And there's a sense among the citizenry that it's really valuable and important to own a piece of the stock. They also offered incentives like low interest loans and other things to get people on board. They sold it around the Gulf region, so some of their neighboring countries bought in. So there was a comment made by one of the senior ministers, the oil minister, I believe. This was something we did with our friends and family. So yes, there's a little bit of a
what happens
sense
if this
of
really doesn't work? I mean, what happens to MBS? What happens to his stature, power, and by the way, if they ultimately can't fund all the things he wants to do because the valuation doesn't get to where it ultimately needs to be?
So MBS has taken a lot of dings in the last few years already. I mean, there was the Khashoggi murder. There was the detention of the elites at the Ritz, which I think hurt the international reputation of Saudi as a place to do business. It eroded trust. There has been the war with Yemen, which has been highly controversial. So those are just a few things that have been an issue. But elusive foreign investment, I think, is a key. And I think, in a way, the economics of all this, as we all know, are critical. And if over time the Aramco IPO doesn't help diversify the economy and bring in proceeds to do other things, that could be problematic. They really need a job creation vehicle that gets people away from being dependent upon government jobs. And slowly but surely, they're bringing in some outside players, but it has been more elusive, perhaps, than he imagined.